Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about where your weight goes in your feet. A lot of the times you will hear teachers say that you should keep the weight in the ball of your foot, but then some other teachers might tell you to get your heels down, put your heels on the floor, and they'll tell you, like, when you point your toes, don't put your weight on your toes, don't crunch your toes, but yet when you're pointing your leg in the air, they tell you to point harder. So what are we supposed to be doing? Okay, so when you are standing and both your feet are on the ground, your weight should be pretty evenly distributed across your whole foot. But you do want slightly more weight in the ball of your foot. And I should note, this is just the conclusion that I have personally come to. I know there might be exceptions to this rule. For example, I know Balanchine dancers definitely have to keep most of their weight in the front of their foot, especially if they're moving quickly. I'm trained in the Vaganova method. We like to keep the heels down, but still don't put all your weight in the heel. Even my Vaganova teacher still says make sure some of your weight is over the ball of your foot. So this is just kind of the conclusion I have come to from asking other dancers, asking teachers, just figuring out my own placement in ballet class with my knowledge of anatomy and physiology. So here we go. Because when you're in ballet, the whole point is to be turning out and constantly rotating and constantly lifting all these muscles. It is really hard to do that if you're sitting in your heels. Once you sit in your heels, then you lose the control in the rest of your legs. So look, once I sit in my heels, these muscles get lazy. When you sit in your heel, it makes it easier for you to sit back in your hip. Sometimes your butt will stick out. See, when I get my weight slightly over my toes, I have more control over this and keeping this turned out. But once I transfer my weight into my heels, I kind of lose it. So not only are you losing the active, engaged turnout, you're also losing your placement, a proper placement over your foot, over your hips, rather than sitting back in your hips, which is not what we want, ever. We don't like that. So actually, you have to think of your feet as kind of like the Eiffel Tower or a tripod or something. You have more control, you have more balance if you send the weight out a little farther, if that makes sense. So if your weight is out here, your weight is distributed farther from you, and you have more balance and you have more control. Think of like a tripod. If you set up a tripod and the feet are just right here and small and all the weight is on the inside right under you, you are more likely to wobble and lose balance. But if you send the weight out slightly farther, you have more balance, more control, more support. Also, anything you do on one foot at the bar, girls especially, you're going to be expected to be able to do it on releve, if not point. So if your weight is always in the back of your heels, guess what? You don't even have your toes on the floor. How are you going to get up to releve? But if you already have your weight right there over your toes, ready to go, hopping up on releve will be no problem. We also need emphasis on the ball of the foot because that is where our pointing our toes comes from. We prepare for our jumps, for pushing off, by working through the ball of the foot. We work through the ball of the foot and then stretch. When you point your foot, it really should feel like a stretch. It's more like a toe lengthening thing than crunching. You don't want to crunch your toes for a couple of reasons. Once you start crunching, the body will naturally want to pull back. That can create sickling, it can just create an ugly foot. So pointing should always feel like a stretching. And every once in a while, maybe if your foot is high in the air, and you feel like you're losing control of your leg, maybe you can crunch a little bit just to like feel that connection from your toe to your hip to kind of make your leg feel shorter for a moment. But for the most part, the gripping and the crunching of the toes is dangerous. Because again, if you're jumping and you're crunching your toes, what happens if you land like that? You're gonna hurt yourself. You can't push off of crunched toes, and you can't land on crunched toes. So when you're pointing your toes, you shouldn't crunch them or bring them back, or you should never do anything that you can't push off of and then land from. So when you're jumping, the whole point of jumping is to roll through the foot. So it's toe, ball, heel. You got to get your heel down, because if you just do toe, ball, you're going to strain a lot of this. Anytime you plie is when you plant your heels on the floor. Plie is when you plant your heels on the floor, because keeping your heel down during a plie helps you access your butt muscle. And you need your butt muscle when you're pushing off for a jump or when you're transferring your weight. So your heels are meant to be planted in plie. Okay, and I hope I'm not confusing you. I'm not saying that it's wrong to have weight in your heels. And I'm not saying that you need to have 100% of your weight in the ball of your foot 100% of the time. I think the conclusion that I have come to is that even if you have your weight in your heel, it would still benefit you to at least be conscious of the weight that's in the ball of your foot, if not have slightly more of your weight in the ball of your foot. And this is only because in ballet, the ball of the foot is what starts and finishes so many movements, you know, like the ball of the foot leads when we do something, and it's the first thing to come down. So it's okay to have your weight in your heels at the end of the movement, or maybe way before you start a movement, but I think always being prepared to be using the ball of your foot and always have access to it and having some of your weight over the ball of the foot, I think at least being conscious of it being there is probably going to help you the most in ballet class. Anytime you're straight, you have to also be ready for releve. That is why most of the time the weight needs to stay in the ball of your foot.